No. I'm going to be sitting over here running a Helio, but I just wanted to say thank you, Star. Thank you very much for inviting me, and it's a pleasure to be here. Reminds me so much of the little community I grew up in Dale, Montana, which I'd be totally amazed if anybody's ever heard of it. It's in the chin of Montana, southwestern Montana, and this reminds me very much of that. And I have a soft spot my heart for rural communities, and it's really good to see that, how much you're organized and doing all sorts of good things. To me, that's the strength of America, so I'm glad to see that. So I'm going to share with you some images and a few, stories about a place that's just up the road here, and I'm sure that you're all familiar. Let me ask you, when I say Del Rio Springs, how many of you know of it well or know something about it? At least have heard of it? Okay, well, that's happened. That's good. It's interesting because most of us, if we drive, back and forth between St. Paul and Eskridge, we pass this place every day on the east side of the road. But most people don't really know what's there, and what's there is a lot. And, the title I gave it here, an oasis of history and possibility. And the oasis comes from the fact that it's an artesian spring that old-timers tell me at one point when you would go there to Del Rio Springs, that water was gushing up out of the ground, almost as high as a man. I mean, it's just, the pressure was that great that it was plentiful, and because there's been water there for a very long time, we don't know for sure, but we think that human beings have been attracted to that place going back at least 8,000 years. I'll get into that a little later in the program. And then obviously wildlife, and when we get to the time that the Europeans come on the scene here in 1863, it becomes a pretty going concern, because anytime you've got water here in the highlands of Arizona, you're in business one way or another. So this is what most of us might see if we're going on Highway 89 past. It's about Road 6. Does this look familiar? Big Cottonwoods. It's about how many miles from here would it be? Probably only 5 or less. Yeah, not very far. That's what we see pretty much from the highway. And those cottonwoods, the written history of this place goes back about 150 years, and people talk about the big cottonwood grove. And it's still there. Some of the big cottonwoods are dying, I noticed when we came by tonight. But there's, new growth. And herons have nested there in the top of those cottonwoods for, again, the early settlers talked about the herons being a part of that every February. If you were to drive up that little Road 6, up just a quarter of a mile and drop over a little ridge, this is what you would see. And this is kind of the heart of Del Rio Springs. And what we're looking at there is one of the old Santa Fe wells with the dairies on it. And that kind of gives you a clue of how important this place was, because there was water there year-round, every year. And there aren't too many places in central and northern Arizona where you count on getting water on the surface all year round. When the Peavine Railroad came through, let me get my, have to be careful with this thing. I just got this gizmo a while back. They told me not to aim it at the sky. So the Peavine goes right back here, and of course that's the one that comes right up just across. Where does the Peavine come through here? Just right there? Okay, so, all right. Is it?
That was siding, which is the original.
Okay. So, so the train which came down from the big east-west lines, you know, the Ashland Peak and Santa Fe, among others, and then they would get on the Peavine and come all the way down to Paulden here, and then here they come from Paulden, and a little bit later in the presentation, I'll show you some of the railroad works and where they unloaded the water, and I'll talk a little bit more about where that water went. So, when you talk about Del Rio Springs, what we're actually talking about is the result of, you know, rain falling way down in Prescott up there, and the mountains, the Agua Prieta and Bradshaw, and then it's one of those rare water features that run from south to north. You typically always think about going in that direction, but that water, Granite Creek, of course, brings the water this way. That's not usually running on the surface. Most of you, if you've been around, know there's only times of the year. But underneath, of course, that water percolates and continues to make its way in this direction. And then at Del Rio Springs was one of the places where it actually comes to the surface. And back in the day before, now I live in the city of Prescott, so I have to, when I say they, I have to include myself. When we in the city of Prescott turn on our tap, we're drawing water that actually comes from beneath Del Rio Springs to this day. And then the city of Prescott's been tapping that for over 100 years. So because we, you know, the city of Prescott has been using that water for so long, you only have a few places now where you actually have water running on the surface. And if you look at the various history, sometimes it's called Little Chino Creek, sometimes Yanega Creek, various names. But there's still spots, it's not continuous now, where you'll see surface water and you'll see a dry stretch. These willows are amazing, huge trees. And you wouldn't see this unless you got on the property. There's 3,000 acres there now. What has very soon been known as Del Rio Ranch Limited. When I first came to this area in 1992, and found out about this place, I was told that it was owned by a man by the name of James Bond. And I said, oh, a spy. He wasn't a spy, but he was a real guy, and he bought that ranch. That was part of the private property ownership. And it has gone to a number of hands, and towards the end, I'll talk about what I know about what's planned for now. But just to orient you, if we were standing up on a ridge on the east side of Del Rio Springs, looking south, there's Granite Mountain, and so Prescott. This was a real smoky day when I took this picture. It was one of the many days. I don't know if it was a natural cause fire or sky burn, but nonetheless. And you can sort of get a sense of that water coming up, and you can sort of see here it kind of makes the bend. There's the Peavine, and then it's going to head on north there. So as we come on north, and you might have seen some of these buildings. Again, if you're going back towards Chino and you look off to your left, the highway's over here, you can see these remnants of the Fred Harvey farms. Give you a little more about that. Coming on north more, now we're coming towards Paulden here, so again, this is, you know, some of these were original buildings from the Fred Harvey era, and there was an amazing, you know, amount of activity going on in Del Rio Springs. Farther north, there's Old 89 over there. Some of the Sullivan Buttes formations, which, let's see, where would they be from here? Over here? Yes. Am I pointing in the right direction? Yes. Okay. Thank you. And now we're getting a little farther north, and we're starting to almost get into our area up here, near Paulden. There's a point there on the north end of the Del Rio Springs Ranch property where you see this little volcanic ridge, and here's the Peavine going through. There's something happening similarly right underneath the surface. One of the geologists said it's as if there was if you imagine a big bathtub underneath all of kind of the Little Chino area, and that tub is tipped a little bit on this north side, which means it's lower so that subsurface water that's been kind of impounded in Little Chino Valley back here actually comes on through, and then it keeps going north. And if we had photos, it ends up in Sullivan Canyon. It actually dumps into and becomes part of what was, a fairly significant source of water for the Upper Verde River. The bigger part of that, of course, comes from right here where you are, underneath you here, the Big Chino. About 80% of the flow of the Upper Verde we think comes. I'm not going to get into politics here because other people have other schemes, but I throw in with those that say the major contribution of the Upper Verde River is right under our feet here, Baldwin and the Big Chino. The other 20% came from Del Rio Springs, and some of that still does arrive at surface. So here's Old 89. You probably know this bridge. You know this spot. Kind of neat because here's where Sullivan Canyon begins. So we're out here somewhere, maybe a little more up there. But this is looking west towards, Big Chino, an amazing, huge valley or basin, however you want to call it. And this is where it all begins in terms of the Verde River. And so, where you live here, you're kind of at the confluence of the Big Chino and the Little Chino. And the Verde River and all that flows from that literally wouldn't be possible for the contribution up here of the rain that fall. So this is a satellite view. Here's 89. This is Chino Valley down here. Here's Del Rio Springs, and there's the highway going up. And Baldwin is going to be over in here somewhere. I just want to point out, here's Sullivan Buttes. And remember when I just showed you that shot that where the edge of the bathtub, you can kind of get a sense here of the northern end of the Little Chino Basin. Kind of see how the water gets hemmed in. And as I said, it just pours through in a wonderful spot there. So, this is up here in your country. This is out looking sort of from the northern end of the Del Rio Ranch, looking north and west across Big Chino. And I'm sure you've seen this. I hope you see this once in a while, the rain actually falling here and replenishing our aquifers and so forth. It's a beautiful sight. And just the other day, I had the pleasure of going with a friend and parking up here just off 89 and hiking back over here. What do you call, I almost pointed my finger, what do you call this series of hills here over the Black Mesa? The Mesa? Big Black Mesa, okay. Thank you. Big Black. So this would be looking down off Big Black Mesa. You probably think I know this spot. And here's part of Greater Baldwin. I don't think we can probably see the community center here, right? It would be more this way. This is a beautiful shot, by the way. Someday I could imagine there a revolving restaurant out there with views of Can't you see that? Maybe not. So that's kind of the greater area of Del Rio Springs. Now, I'm not going to read this, not even going to go into this very much, except, I'm a college professor, but I tell you, when I get to talking to the geologists and the hydrologists, my eyes start to cross. It gets really technical really fast. I can't say that I know a lot of this, but I just want to say this bit, that in Little Chino Valley, you've got layers. It's the upper layers. Can you imagine all those thousands or even tens of thousands of years of the water moving this way and bringing soil and rocks with it? So that fill, several hundred feet deep, that's still what they call the upper aquifer. And then beneath that, you start to hit that bedrock, that volcanic, that dark basalt that you see all over here. And most of what the private wells and most of the water that came to the surface at Del Rio Springs was in this upper unit. The city of Prescott has its soda straws punched on down into that lower unit, so they're actually drawing from the lower aquifers. But there is a connection between the upper one and the lower one. It's bizarre name, an aquitard. It's strange. Sounds like something dancers would wear. But one of the things they don't know is when the rain comes down and it percolates down to that top layer, how long does it take it to get into this bottom layer? Because it has to go through, so much to get there. But we don't know the answer to that. And that's important because as we start to dry up these upper aquifer layers, and if the city is, drawing from the lower one, we don't actually know what that combined effect is. And so the uncertainty, and this is the heartbreaker for me, what the geologists say is that by 2025, which is that far away, the waters of Del Rio Springs will be gone, and Del Rio Springs will be no more. This makes my heart, sad. I hope that doesn't happen. At the very end, I will tell you my plan, which is to somehow get the citizens of Prescott to use less water. We use a lot of it. And that's one of the only ways that we would ever get to keep the flow going. So again, Cienega Creek, if you get up close to it, there's some beautiful little spots. It's positively lush in there. And as you might imagine, you've got all the aquatic life, and then the bird life, and then the wildlife. And speaking of wildlife, some of you know these folks. This is how Eve, my wife Eve, and I first became familiar with Del Rio Springs, because at that time, in the early 90s, up to about 2001, I believe, Harley Shaw and Patty Woodruff were living there. There used to be a brick house there. It was the old pumper's cottage back in the day when Prescott was pumping water and piping it on down to the city. The pumper lived there. In later years, the city of Prescott refurbished that house for caretakers to kind of watch. The city only owns about 2.5 acres, just a little tiny portion of it. And so Harley and Patty lived there for about 9 years. They're both wildlife biologists. Harley is most famous for his book, Soul Among the Islands. He's one of the world's foremost cougar experts. And through their eyes, that's how I first learned about Del Rio Springs and fell in love with it, as they talked about the amazing, wildlife that was there. Now, interestingly, it's really still powder dry if you get very far off that riparian corridor. And it just shows the importance of having surface water here. In fact, it's so dry that there are places, it'd be kind of scary, the earth actually cracks. It's kind of heavy clay soil. You kind of got to watch where you step, or you could end up taking the elevator there. But in the grove, as Harley and Patty described, their bedroom was in the upper story, right in the grove of cottonwoods and willows, and they said it was like living in a treehouse. Constant bird chatter and songs, and they got to see the whole life cycle of all those species of birds during those years they were there. And there's every imaginable critter coming around. You've got cobras, bull snake, I think is impressive. I don't know if we can see the tail there, but I just know I have a really good startle response if I'm walking along and I almost step on one of these guys. Even for an old guy, I can jump pretty high. There's a rare species of wood ant there, and it's an ant that actually make their colonies out of these little chips of wood. Normally you see them making them out of stones, but there's a species there, and probably because there's so much organic matter, that's what they make there. So there's just an amazing amount of life. Who are trappers here? You're right, raccoons. Raccoons, and here's the herons, and they build these amazing glass-dwelling nests. And the historical records show that they generally show up every spring, somewhere between February 15th and 22nd. They're pretty regular. I don't know where they hide their watches, or their calendars. They're really, really on time. So I'm hoping, because of course, if the water goes, what's going to happen to all the trees? All the trees will die. Yeah, there won't be any trees, and then there won't be any places for the herons to go. So I hope that doesn't happen. So I had heard that there were some Pueblo sites on the Del Rio Ranch property, but until I went out there with an anthropologist and was amazed to learn that there are actually 7 types. There are two pueblos. These are small pueblos. They're only maybe 2 or 3 rooms in capacity. This one's up on the ridge on the east side of the Del Rio property. Just to orient you again, here the pea vine's right on below here, and we're looking back south towards Texas. There's a lower one called Cienega Pueblo. This is down by the farm buildings, and this is another several room pueblo. And we don't know for sure, but a pottery church that they found there. One of the things we do know is that Del Rio was kind of a rough road. And that's back in the day when people walked everywhere. Maybe they had a horse. But there are pottery sherds there from Hopi, even from Zuni, from some of the Thai peoples over here, Havasu Thai, and then all the way down south to Hohokam, down in the Phoenix area. So it's pretty obvious that because there was water here again, right, they could count on, after a hard walk or hunting or whatever people were doing, they would meet at Del Rio Springs, and then there were people living there. And as I said, the records are sketchy, but we think at least 8,000 years ago, goes back that far. The people have been there. They had fields, so they were actually doing farming there, cotton and corn. It wasn't the corn that we know, it was little bitty ears, but it was corn nonetheless, among other things. So, then you have Europeans coming onto the scene, and south of the Grand Canyon through here, kind of along the Route 66 corridor, this was one of the last places to be explored in the lower 48. It's kind of fascinating to me that maybe partly because the Grand Canyon was sort of a barrier for north-south. There was a lot of activity down closer to the Mexican border, of course. But up here, this place was really not on the map, literally, until, I love this, in about 1829, these two guys, Jimmy Carter was a mountain man, and Kit Carson, who you've probably heard of, they came through here, and Kit Carson actually had a diary. One of the things he said was, and we figure they found water here at Del Rio Springs or somewhere right in here. And then they headed up the Big Chino up into that country. And as you know, once you get out of Big Chino Valley, it starts to get pretty dry. Really dry. So dry that these guys would shoot deer, not so much for the meat, but to take the stomachs to make vessels to carry water. So they use deer stomachs as, sort of our version of bottled water. I don't know what kind of flavor it gave it, but anyway, old Kit was complaining in his journal that it was just gosh darn dry. Really, really dry. So then in the 1850s, we get the Army Corps, Topographical Corps of Engineers, and the Whipple expedition came across and basically scouted out the line that would later become the railroad and ultimately what we would know today, then Interstate 40. So that whole corridor was, and Whipple came almost to this spot. He came down south of Picacho Peak, if you know where that is, near Seligman, and they did a reconnaissance that brought him down to Big Chino, and he had heard about the Little Chino and the Artesian water. So it was recorded again in 1854, and that just added to the interest in this area for ultimate settlement. So then we get into, they're saying the pea vine is dropped down after the East-West Railroad was established, and now you've got the means to, transport people, livestock, goods, and water. So Del Rio Springs at this point becomes central to life not only here, but they ran 100-car water trains, these big old cars, and they would pull up there at Del Rio Springs, and you can still see, maybe you've seen this tank, it still sits up there kind of on the hill on the east side of the highway. Look for it, this tank. Well, stop your car and then look for it. Don't text while you drive, don't look for water tanks while you drive. Please stop and look for it. It's quite a landmark up there. It survived. And these were, so they would pump the water from the springs down here up into these holding tanks. There used to be more of them. And then this is the pea down here. the rail cars would pull up, and then they had these sort of stanchions, and they would unload the cars. I met an Asian gentleman who, as a boy, one of his jobs at Del Rio Springs was, he said, to purify the water. I said, well, Roy, what did that involve? And he said, well, you know Clorox? I said, yeah, I know Clorox. He said, I'd take a tin cup, I'd pour it full of Clorox, and I'd throw it in the top of each rail car. And by the time they got north, all that slosh and solution, by the Clorox got all mixed into the water. So it was purified. Right. Works. This is just a close-up of that tank. And this is the pea vine. Can anybody read that? It's just, it was a concrete culvert, but it was kind of I can't remember if it was 18 or 19. It might be like 19.
Oh, we have 3 out of 4.
So that water that was going by rail actually was, when it got up to Ashford, some of the cars would go to the west, and that water went to Seligman, actually even points on to the west. Some of it went to the east. Williams got water from Del Rio Springs. At Williams, it got on that train which they still have running today that goes all the way up to the Grand Canyon. And all the water for the tourists who were, at that beginning of the tourist industry on the South Rim, all that water came from Del Rio Springs. And that's not all. Because there was water, as you can imagine, I come from a long line of farmers and ranchers. Somebody got the idea, well, we could make hay over there, and then they did. They had grain, they had hay, they had corn fields. I've seen pictures at least 12, 15 feet high. It was an amazingly abundant agricultural area, and there was, am I right, that was going on somewhere here in Davicino as well, right? I think agriculture was a really big deal. If you need to see it be a big deal, yeah. So this is just another shot. Back in the day, a couple of ladies watching the fields there. The pea vines back there. These buildings still exist. So there's some Del Rio cowboys. Look like real cowboys. Got the hats. Some of them anyway. So today you can still see this building. This is the dairy barn. And the Fred Harvey Farms. Fred Harvey was the company, the concessionaire that ran the food and so forth for the tourist venues at the Grand Canyon, among other places in the Southwest. That's right, and the Hardy Girls. That's right, the Hardy Girls. There's even a movie, right? So the produce from Del Rio Farms included milk. They had quite a dairy there, and they had this little kind of little narrow track that ran. This was the milking barn, and the stanchions are still in there. And they took it up to another little building, which is still there, and that was the cooling room. They would cool the milk, and then it would go on to the pea vine, which would be just over here, not very far. And again, headed from north. So when people sat down at the Alto Bar, fancy people in their fancy clothes, to have their fancy meal, most of that food and the water came from right here.
The water systems are still at the same.
Are they?
Yep. Right by the track.
Nice. I should get some pictures of those. Thank you. Because that's the other end of it then, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah. Perfect. Thank you. Here's the stanchions, the milk stanchions inside the farm. They have poultry. These buildings still stand. I don't know for much longer, but fresh eggs as well. That's good. And again, just to orient you, this is back up at that prototype. You can see there's the dairy barn, there's the poultry barn. And again, when you stop your car to look, you know that monument? It's actually over there, the highway marker. That's a good place to stop. It's over about in there, and you can look straight across and you can see these buildings. That's all still there. So then we get to the city of Prescott actually owned that property. There is roughly 3,000 acres there up until about 1956. And the city decided to get out of the ranching business as it were. It's interesting because it's back in, right? It's now bought the ranch up yonder, right? What is that?
One of the elections came
Okay.
outside.
Does it just do that all the time? Okay. So, um, so as we get into the current era, as you might remember the big housing boom, you know, in the early 2000s, and how, I don't know about out here, but in City Prescott, there was just a long line of developers, and when they would come in, they'd say, we're going to build 5,000 homes here and 10,000 homes there. I mean, it was just an amazing thing. We would have been bigger than meetings if that was going. Between you and me, I'm glad it didn't quite keep going at that rate, because I don't know that that would have been real good for everybody involved. But just the other day, thanks to Craig Brown, I got to meet the local man who's part of the development team and the owners, the current owners of Delaware Springs. And so I got to ask him. Now, there have been a lot of schemes. At one point, the developers were going to put 5,000 homes at Delaware Springs. They're going to put in 3 golf courses, 2 shopping centers, a Hilton, I think, a tennis ranch. I mean, we'd have had 15 traffic lights between Chino Valley and here if that would have gone through.
We're all kind of in school.
So there was going to be a school. Okay, well that was good, at least a school, because that would have brought in an enormous number of people. Because of the water, right? There's water, so of course that's what we do. But he said those days are gone, and the current development group is interested in a much smaller scale thing. They don't know yet what it will look like. I think at some point they'll start having public hearings, and I would certainly encourage you to attend, because you know you might be able to influence what happens there, because it is your backyard here. That's right. It should be. I would love to see it be a national monument. This place on the center of the property, I got signed permission to trespass on the Del Rio Ranch over the years because I was doing this on history. This spot is always of interest to me because now I grew up in a farming community, very familiar with head gates. But the interesting thing about this pair of head gates is this one is up. So the flow of Little Chino Creek from south to north is all going down this concrete ditch. I'll show you a slide in a minute where it goes. This one is down. This is the original creek, which of course is totally dry. So all the water is being diverted over here, where it heads off towards fields, which you can probably see they're not too far off the highway. And there are cows grazing out there. There's a ranch operation there. And I actually like this guy, this local developer, he's actually a good guy. And I said, you know, Paul, what would be neat is back where that water splits, if we could keep a little bit in the other side. He said that they're actually thinking about that. Because what used to be a stream that ran through the entire property is now dry. So when I think about the future of Del Rio Springs, if it's to have a future, one of the things, and since you have a community center here, I think the region ought to get on board. Next year is the 150th anniversary of we'll call it the European sort of discovery, not counting Kit Carson, because he was just a tourist. But when they actually came and established Camp Clark there at Del Rio Springs, and then you probably know the story, in the next year, it was actually in February of 1864, they established the Arizona Territorial Capital. So for a few months, the territorial capital was right here, right in the neighborhood. So I think that's worth celebrating, and it might bring a lot of interest and attention to it. There have been various people over the years who said, as you heard it again a moment ago, maybe that area should become some kind of a natural or cultural center. It could attract, I think, visitors and so forth. There's a possibility to bring some agriculture back there, and it would really be neat if we could grow more of our own food right here. Have you heard this figure? Do you know how far the average food travels to get to our place if we don't have our own garden? Have you heard this? That's right. 1,500 miles. That's a long ways. And I worry about what might happen to it in the future too. So, I mean, who knows? So, locally produced food, and we do have some unique farms, as you know, right here in the Paulden and Chino Valley area. I don't know that we could actually bring back the Piedmont Railroad, it's really kind of neat. But one quick story, when we first moved to Prescott, one of the old timers said there was a huge snowstorm here. 1967. Didn't you live here then? Remember? 67? Okay. It was sort of like one storm came through and then somebody just like turned around and came back or something. It was like two big snow events. I mean, that's amazing. I mean, that's just... So the only thing that was moving, I'm told, was the railroad. That's the only thing that can get through. Obviously, you can't take your car through, intensely to snow. So it would be kind of neat if we had, maybe it would be a narrow gauge railroad or something again. Who knows? We've got a lot of scientists in this area that study, because there's so much interesting here in the geology and the hydrology. It would be neat to see some kind of a national science center there, because water, or the lack of water, is so critical to everything here. It would be nice to have a place where everybody from school children, the schools here in Del Rio Elementary School in Chino Valley and on down, could have a place to go and really understand water literally from the under the ground up. The ecologists say that if we can, sort of lessen the pumping, and when I say we, the city of Prescott, those that live in the city of Prescott, if we're more conservative in our use of the water, if there's still enough water flowing that the springs would continue to flow on top of, on the surface. And you'd actually see an amazing kind of a meander all the way from about Road 6 all the way up here to where it dumps to the Sullivan Canyon. That would be an amazing sight. And it would probably become world-renowned for birds. Harley and Patty kept track and discovered over 100 species of birds that visited Del Rio Springs at various times. Some of them were year-round residents, a lot of them were migrants, because the birds depend on these, again, dependable sources of water. And then if the developers want to have, homes there, they could do, them in the sort of the style of the original farming era. Because there were a number of farmhouses down there. There's still a few at Del Rio, but most of them are gone. Are there some up here in Big Chino? Do we see some farmhouses that go back a ways? So, in that style, because, I don't know, developers think if they build it, people will come. And if they come, maybe if it's tied into the regional, history, that might be something that would, and maybe people here would want to do something. So somehow, there are many solutions proposed. One of the ones that I don't like, and this is my acronym. Have you heard about this? They're going to do a test over in Old Home Manor in Chino Valley, where you basically take away all the vegetation, trees, grass, everything. You take bulldozers and make these sort of dikes. And the idea is when the rain comes down, it can't go anywhere until it'll soak down into the aquifer. Well, as a little test case over there, a few acres, that's one thing. But that would be the prelude to coming over here in Big Chino, where the city of Prescott has its ranch, which I think Star said it's about, 14 miles that way. They want to do this on a massive scale, like defoliate, just bulldoze off every living thing, and then when the rain comes, it'll percolate down into the Big Chino aquifer, and then the city floods it. You didn't hear me say it, but it sounds like a crazy scene. And I worry about, scuffling up that much land, because I'm afraid then when you get westerly winds here, right? It comes kind of from west and south. I'm afraid we're going to have dust bowl days over there. So all they have to do is get the people of the city Preston to just conserve, only use 95% as much water as they do now. I'll turn off my tap 5% of the time. That's not going to be harsh on me. That would actually save more water than this whacking steam, whatever it could. The science isn't even there yet. I'm going to continue to research this, but it's not even proven that you gain that much. Let alone that here, as in most states, SRP actually owns the rights to the rain that falls out of the sky. So technically, if Terrell wanted to put up a little rain catcher and barrel in his house, he could have an SRP guy knock on the door and say, that's illegal. I don't think
States have already done directed to stop them from collecting rain.
Yeah, imagine that we couldn't even have a rain barrel. I don't think it'll come to that, but I don't think we need big schemes. I think we just need to have some sensible conservation. The city of Prescott's water system is so antiquated that they lose more in leaks. They lose 3 to 4% a year just in leaks. So I would be in favor of why don't we fix the pipes? That'd be a good thing to do. And just towards the end, it's the city of Prescott, and as you can, maybe see, it's really kind of hard to read. What does it say? Residential? Yeah. So residential, all the water that goes from Del Rio Springs to Prescott, 67% goes to, houses like the one I live in. Commercial is about 18% and so forth. So if people, put bricks in the toilets and don't leave the water running. I never wash my car. I never wash my car. I wash the windows if they get too dirty. I don't know, my car looks, it's desert brown. That's it. So the city of Prescott does take water that goes through the treatment center and they put it back down into the aquifer. So they're doing this recharge center. You know about that? Recharge. That's right. Do we all want to fight the fire now? That's okay. So I'm almost to the end here, and then we can run to fight that fire. So literally, where I grew up, everybody was on the volunteer fire department. When the siren went off, the place would just empty out. Maybe that happens here too. Is that true?
Usually we go.
Okay. So here's the question for you. What is the largest perennial stream in the greater Prescott area? So the largest stream that runs year-round in the Prescott area. It runs 24/7 all the time. That would be a good guess, but Grand Creek doesn't run all year round.
So that's the one on
That's Grand Creek, yeah. In stretches, it usually runs, but it doesn't run year round. Right now, it's pretty dry. Well, you ready for this? I call it Sundog Creek. I hope you've all had your dinners a while back. If you go out to the treatment center, you're going to see this sucker runs more, 10 cubic feet per second, than the upper Verdon does most times of the year. So, the Sundog Creek, the Brown River, whatever you want to call it, this is all that Del Rio Springs water that ends up in Prescott, and then goes through everything and everybody, and gets returned to the treatment center. So, there's plenty we can do just to conserve and be wiser use of the water. So this was my little garden early in the year. So one simple thing was I just, put in the, drip system, and it cuts the use in quarter. But I go up and down the streets of Prescott and I see sprinklers going. I see water running down the street. It's like.
The golf course at the airport, where half of it goes on the road.
That's right, the irrigated road.
Yeah, you go by them and they're saying half of it goes on the road.
Yeah, I never did know if they thought that makes the road grow and then they won't have to. So just to kind of sum up here, in 1940 at Del Rio Springs, this would be if we could go underground and see what was happening. The arrows indicate the movement of the water. So you see how all the arrows are doing what they're going up, meaning that's where that artesian stream is, right? Because there's so much water traveling underneath the ground that the pressure is enough that it actually goes this. Now, 2008 was the last time this and look what's happened to the arrows. They go in the other direction. So we no longer have that tremendous subsurface amount of water pushing up. Now it's going the other way. I say it's trying to hide, because it's just, there's so much pressure for the use. So unless something happens, as I said, the geologists say Del Rio Springs will dry up in the next 10 to 15 years. So as I get into the end here, this is there's a graveyard out there at Del Rio Springs, and the Shivers family was one of the prominent families back then. I didn't know if any of them are still in the area. Is that name around at all? Anybody? Okay. Yeah, maybe not. But this was Mrs. Shivers, and this was a young child that had died back then. So every time I go and visit that little graveyard, I just think about, what will our epitaph be? Those of us who live here now. I mean, what do we want to leave to, our young people? And so, without trying to be politic here, I'm just doing what I can in the city best to see if we can conserve. And I think the 150th anniversary is a good time to do this. It's a joint effort. I think all citizens could be involved in helping to conserve water, so that when future generations say, how do we measure up? This is the stream gauge on the Middle Del Rio Ranch. So this literally, as you can see, the water depth there is just barely a foot. They have these little boxes, and that's how much cubic feet of water goes through. It's a tiny, tiny bit. That's all that goes through these days. It used to be way up here. So I don't know. Will it be sundown for Del Rio Springs? And I hope in some way community organizations like yours can join the ones that we have. There's a new group called the Watershed We Want. There's a lot of action out there now, so I hope we can join together and do what local people always do best, which is, what's the bumper sticker? When the people leave, the leaders will follow. All right. Just thank you again. I really appreciate the opportunity.
Valley Historical Society has permit rights to do tours on Del Rio property, and they also have a plan to clean up the grave sites, specifically